Вітаю всіх.
Greeting, everyone. This is Ukraine Crisis Media Center, and that is a special project of Ukraine Crisis Media Center, Coffee with Troshchynska. My name is Tetiana Troshchynska, and today we have Valeriy Chaly, and the extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador in 2016-2019. Valeriy Chaly. Greetings, everyone. Greetings to all the journalists who came to us today, and they would like to listen about the U.S.
Journalists who come to Ukraine Crisis Media Center today.
І так само хочу сказати,
And also, I would like to say to our audience and to colleagues in this audience that in the end of our dialogue, we will have some time for the Q&A session, because I'm quite sure that I will not be able to cover all the questions myself. But nevertheless, I would like to start with the general topic, because today morning, for those who are in Kyiv, is the very interesting background for the negotiations which are upcoming, because we had a long air raid alarm and also the bombers in the sky. So this kind of background is the pressure of the reality on the one hand, and at the same time, just in the last few days after we found out that Trump is prevailing on the elections in the US, lots of information appears in media on the so-called peace plans. We can call them offers, so we can call them, there are some offers to freeze the conflicts, and a lot of American media are writing about that. And I can imagine Ukrainians who are constantly under the pressure of this information, which is constantly changing, which is updating, and it's not always meeting our vision of what is happening, and all of these things are very complicated. So the first question is absolutely navigating one. So what should we do in this incredible informational noise if you have less knowledge about American policy and politics? Thank you for your question. And I will try to describe it in a very structured way. The informational environment is often different from the real facts, especially when we have elections, and it doesn't matter where these elections happen. The promises made during the election campaigns and their implementation later is not always the same thing. And the great example of it is the promise of the President of the US, Donald Trump, to stop the war in 24 hours, even before he became the president officially. And some of us perceive it as a truth, but nevertheless, for the Ukrainians who've heard from that time spokesperson of the Ukrainian official government, Mr. Arestovich, about the end of the war in 2-3 weeks, well, I think that these people have to be more tolerant to the rest of the promises they hear, because they believed at that time, and they were saying everyone that that is what is going to happen. Then the war will end in 2-3 weeks. I think that this time they are going to understand their mistake. So I was not focused on the informational environment, but people nowadays are focused on the informational environment, and therefore any kind of information from the source which is not verified in the reliable news outlet is considered to be reliable. Most of the comments which we can see in the Western news outlets, they are not justified, but this justification, the information which they typically get from the official sources, sometimes it can be some specific. It's not always manipulative, but it is something that helps to counter the opinion of the population. So something that is not comfortable for the government can appear in media. So there are some also manipulations. They can use journalists, misuse journalists. And what should we do with this? Well, nothing. We have to perceive it in this way. There is informational environment which has more impact on the reality than the reality has an impact on itself. And therefore, the position first is formed in the big informational environment. And after that, it is this formed position, it is used to have an impact on the reality. So the peace formulas, the peace plans of various countries are the great example of it, especially of those countries which are far from us. So the proportion is quite understandable. The further from the war the country is, the more mediators they have, because of course they want to use the situation for their own benefits. So how should we perceive it? So trust the people. Who should we trust? In fact, that is our Ukrainian government, and it doesn't matter whether you like it or not, because it was democratically elected. The current president, those experts, real experts, not commentators, not political commentators, but analyticians who have proved their renommee, not in this forecast, because forecast is something difficult and complicated, but in their evaluation of the situation, maybe in some certain forecast for the near future. So if you trust me, I can tell you my position about it, which is not 100% reliable, but I think that it is justified. No peace plans, unfortunately, for Ukraine in the next month will not exist. I mean, the real ones. So that is the first thing. There is no peace plan of Donald Trump so far. That is something that they will have to work on. They will have to consider various leverages, especially on the Russian Federation. And what is even more complicated, there is no strategy for Ukraine prevail, does not exist, because our strategies, Ukrainian and the partner strategies, do not meet. And now we have the question, we have to consider the new conditions and make the new strategies. So all of these things, in my opinion, are very likely to be revised in spring. And I think that before spring we will have no practical discussion, but informational initiatives, various visions on how Ukrainians should capitulate, whether they should give up on some territories or whether they should give up and decrease the army, capitulate with the neutral status, or maybe it will be enough just to capitulate in some other way. So there will be lots of various ideas. And first of all, there will be a strong pressure on Ukraine. And then I think that I really hope that the Russian Federation will not change their approach. And I mean that typically they have, I'm sorry, but they have stupid decisions, mainly to start the war in Ukraine. And I think that they will continue in this way. And the second stage will be different, when they will not agree on any type of consensus. And then both the US and Donald Trump and our partners will have absolutely different positions comparing to what we have now. And of course, it depends on the situation on the frontier. And at the moment, we have the most tense situation on the land since March 2022. And we have great losses among the Russians and North Koreans. But at the same time, we see that the human resources of Ukraine are exhausting as well. And to say it simpler, Ukrainians, our fathers, our brothers, our sons are dying. And that is not fair. At the moment, only Ukrainians are fighting in this war, and we do not see any kind of positive signals. We cannot see any kind of signals about the protection umbrella, and also our NATO membership is also postponed. So the questions which are informational environment, they are going to catch our mind with some controversial ideas, but nevertheless, I would like to recommend the Ukrainians to consider the real situation on their front line, to consider the work of the institutions, and also you have to think whether you are ready to stand for Ukraine to the end. And what you've mentioned about the drones, about the missiles, so that is an attempt to break the strongest part of this chain, and that is the resilience of Ukraine. And if the resilience of Ukraine will be broken, and I don't believe in that in this case, so that is one scenario. And if we will be able to overcome these, then the negotiation positions of Ukraine, or maybe even without negotiations, our positions will be better. We were mentioning the informational pressure, but also there are two more things which seem to be quite realistic, and I guess they are typical for Donald Trump, because he is mentioning quite often that is the readiness for the dialogue with Putin. And we know that he was saying that even before the elections and after he got the majority. And there was also the message from Washington Post yesterday that there was the phone call between Putin and Trump, and most probably they were talking about Ukraine. And there was also the information that Ukrainian administration did not know that there is the phone call is going to happen. I do not know whether it was true or not, but nevertheless there is a message. And the second thing is that the statement which Donald Trump made in his speech, that he's going to end up all the wars in the world. So that are the two important things. I can guess that's imagination, vision on how a situation can develop. What do you think about these two things? So, well, you said that whether Ukrainian side knew about the phone call. So that is the way how we work with the information. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs officially informed that there was no information. I think that we have to listen to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and not the Washington Post. The Washington Post also didn't say about Ukraine. I think that are the journalists, they can say about what they think, but nevertheless, there were lots of phone calls between Moscow and Marijuana, I would say. And that's true, and Donald Trump has never said that it didn't happen. So that Elon Musk had some phone calls with Putin, and of course we are surprised because that is discussion with a war criminal, but there are the people who did not represent the official government at that time. One businessman, and the second one is a politician who was not representing the official government at that time, and at the moment he is newly elected president. So yes, indeed, both the US legislation, by the way, Ukrainian legislation forbids the officials to have the negotiations with this level of criminals. So that is our position, that there is no point to talk to the enemy. And they are absolutely different. They are not in the state of war with the Russian Federation. That is something we have to understand, and that is a big problem. And that is something I would like to emphasize. The ultimatum was made by the Washington, D.C., and it was said directly on the 15th of December 2021, and it was very rude. The Washington was said to step back to remove their systems from Poland and from the other countries. So they have they also mentioned that the U.S. should not agree with the Finland, Polish, and Ukrainian membership in NATO. So they wanted to show their clear position, and they wanted the U.S. to be consequently, and also the rude statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, extremely rude. It was not diplomatic in any way. So once again, they reminded about the ultimatum, and then they to follow the requirements of Putin. In my opinion, all of these things show that they do not understand a very important change that happened, that the elections in the US, it was not just the victory of the representative of the Republican Party, but at the same time it was, I would say, plebiscite of the US, and that was the way to express whether they are ready for the leaders like Donald Trump. And we can see that the temporary return of Joseph Biden was something temporary. The tendency, the general tendency of the rate shift, and that the Republicans won again in the US. I would like to remind you that in 2016, Donald Trump won the elections and as a representative of the Republican Party, and now the Republicans won the Senate with great majority, and Senate means that he can nominate he can nominate for the key positions, and also the Chamber of Representatives, and it can seem that the Republicans will also be the majority there as well. Lots of local authorities in many of these states, they belong to Republican parties. So it's not going to be Donald Trump himself that is going to be the entire system, which the Russian Federation will have to deal with, and they will have to have broader relations with this system. And I will tell you why the situation is even more interesting. So people who would call Trump is the system, so if you want more right-wing sector of the Republican Party, they are becoming stronger, and with Trump, they are in the politics again. But this kind of shift means that the number of the Republicans is increasing. So the era of Obama has ended, and in the next 2 years that is going to be maybe not mono majority as we had in Ukraine with Turbo regime. So Turbo regime is not going to happen there. If you don't know, that is Turbo Desire is low quality legislation to change the system, and in Ukraine it didn't change with some success. So this desire to focus the power in one hands and to make some fast changes, it's not leading to any kind of success. So it's not going to happen in the US. The Congress is going to balance the system, even though many of them are Republicans, and even moreover they can be Trumpists. And the Russian Federation will have to deal with all of this system. That is the first thing. And the second thing is that the fact that they expect at the moment, they expect to make a pressure on the US right now, and they, for some reason, they think that it's going to be successful for them. And in the Russian Federation, the things are not going well, and we can see that every day they are launching 100 drones every day. They have attacks. They are attacking us with ballistic missiles, on the front line or close to the front lines. That is for concentration of their efforts this year to push the US and the world to the idea that Ukraine is not able to continue this war, that the US is not going to support Ukraine. And of course, there are lots of components. For example, they will not give money, they will not give weapons, there will be no political support. And then the rest of the world would have to look at where all of these things are moving towards to, and they will change their policies as well. So I think that in some of the things they will be successful, but I think that all in all they are not going to benefit in that, because I think mainly it is about about sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine, and also I think that both the US and Donald Trump will not support it. Why? Because Donald Trump is focused on the public opinion, and the public opinion of the US is to support Ukraine. That is providing Ukraine with weapons, and the number of these people, even even though it was decreasing during the last 3 years, but nevertheless, the number of people who support in Ukraine is still very high. So Donald Trump, as any kind of president in the U.S., they cannot neglect the public opinion of the U.S., and that is a signal for us who we have to be focused on, who we have to deal with in the future. It's not the White House, it's not the Congress, but also that are the separate states of the U.S., and that is a public opinion in the U.S. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that the U.S. citizen nations have this position, and I'm very glad that there are more Ukrainians in the Congress. Victoria Spartan, which returned this lady to the political world. The conflict with some political actors in Ukraine returned her to the U.S. political. And also Viktor Hinko, he was born in Kyiv, and he's going to return to the Congress. And there are also 3 positions, and I think they're 50-50 in this case. So it seems like we will have more Ukrainians, and of course we would like to have more sufficient approach in understanding of the partnership and allies of Ukraine in the White House. And Victoria Spartz, she's a very controversial lady. In this case, absolutely not controversial actor. She's American. She's from Ukraine. And despite the fact that she studied in Ukraine, she graduated from Ukrainian university, she was coming to Chernihivska Oblast, where she's from. She faced a huge pressure, and she was not allowed to talk to people. She wanted to speak about the work in regions, and she was shown that she has no right to talk about corruption here. And I'm not saying whether it's good or not. I do not know the lots of details, and I also can see that she was trying to do more than the representative of the country, even like U.S., could do. But at the same time, she was supporting. She was the person who was supporting Ukraine, and now she is the controller of Ukraine. She is pro-American, but all of these things show what we shouldn't do with the friends of our enemies. And those who did it, they have to know that you should not treat the people who can become our friends in this way, and because they become our opponents. And whether we can work with Victoria Spartz, absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. And I would like to remind you who got, let's say so, do you remember who got the pen which was signed by Joseph Biden which was signing the law about Lend-Lease? Victoria Spartz. Why? Because at that time there was the offer from the Republicans through the law on Lend-Lease to provide Ukraine with assistance. What does it mean? It meant faster system, and part of it was not pro bono, and of course it was in the framework of the agreement on Lend-Lease and the rent of the weapons. That is something Ukraine did not did not suggest to the US, because they heard that there is going to be finances, and that was the advice of the White House. Why for the Americans it is better to finance? Because the money which go through the defense budget or through the separate package, the executive power have more opportunities to use this money in various areas they're interested in. If you, for example, consider the last package, you will see where the money for the submarine Ohio class was used, more than $2 billion. So of course it did not arrive to the Black Sea, but nevertheless, or for example, the Virginia class submarine. So you will see how the money was distributed, and therefore the Republicans, who had no power at that time, they wanted to have more impact on the distribution and on the control of this money, and therefore they were they were making the pressure on Joseph Biden. And what did Ukraine do? Ukraine dug the hat in in the ground as an ostrich, and they just repeated what one of the political parties said. And officially on the defense council, through the statements of the official, they said that we do not let lease, and later they said, okay, that is Russian smart move to force us to use Lend-Lease. And I think that was a mistake. So, by the way, here we have the conclusion, both with Joseph Biden, who is working at the moment, and who is on Wednesday, on the 13th of November, he is going to meet with Donald Trump, and he is going to explain some things regarding the Russian attack on Ukraine. And later he will provide in the additional support, I hope so. I really hope for his decision, for his strong decisions. I cannot see any signs at the moment that are the strikes on the Russian Federation, which are not forbidden by the international law, that is faster and longer range missiles, ATACMS, and what was already done, that is redirection of the personnel to work on the plans with the American equipment in Ukraine. So we understand that after these, it will be absolutely logical that the veterans, pilot veterans, F-16, which retired veterans, they are going to help us. And I hope that all of these things will happen. But how many things could have been done to prevent this situation? And our mistake, we also made some mistakes. We perceived the position of the U.S. as, I can say that it doesn't matter what kind of president, but we perceive it as the complete truth. I can say that Americans can be also wrong. I can say that Americans, well, they admit their mistakes. Let me remind you Bill Clinton's statement that when he said that he was probably wrong when he was making a pressure on Ukraine to give up on the nuclear weapons. There is a statement like this. And what about the former president in the Ukrainian parliament in 1991, when everything was falling apart in the Soviet Union, and we were urged to stay in this concentration camp, which was forming at that time. So the mistakes can be really serious, and therefore our partners, and now we are talking about Donald Trump, we are talking about the new administrations, new circles, we have to give them our vision and our arguments. For example, he really needs to show who is the leader in this world. He has to show it to these rude bullies, political bullies, the representatives of the Russian Federation, which are threatening Washington D.C. with a nuclear weapon, who say that if Donald Trump will change nothing, that everything depends on Moscow. Well, they have to be shown where is their place in this world, that they should not even bark on the political international stage. They have to revise for the situation with Sarmat explosion, which so Sarmat is Ukrainian missile copied by the Russian Federation, which was used to threaten the Washington D.C. So they are showing in this way their technological lack of preparation, and therefore the launch on the 1st of November, that was a regular launch, but for some reason it was on the day of the American elections. So that was the missile more than 6,000 kilometers, and I think that is enough to strike Moscow from the territory of the Russian Federation from the U.S., and they have quite a lot of missiles like that. It's not Sarmat which exploded when launching. So nuclear country with the ready working nuclear weapon, that is the first argument they have. And second of all, I think that if Joseph Biden didn't dare to do that, I hope that the new team will dare to do this thing, or maybe personally Donald Trump will dare to do that. We should not repeat Ukrainian that we are with you. We are going to be with you for how long it takes. But help with what you can do. First, have the exercises in Alaska, close to the territory of the Russian Federation, with Japan, maybe with South Korea. Just have an exercises here. It's just regular exercises for the Russian Federation to move the forces, the troops, which they moved from those territories here, the marine troops, all the divisions and Iskanders. So for them to uncover their eastern flank, exercise will be enough to help Ukraine, because at the same time they will dislocate there in those regions. Why they are not doing that? The first thing. The second thing is that what I've already mentioned. Why should they? These promises cannot be fulfilled very fast about the support of Ukraine. Why don't you send to Ukraine? So, for example, if Donald Trump is not going to be so active, and so far they do not have the money in the budget, as far as I understand, no law on Lend-Lease, even though law was not used, but it is nevertheless over, and there is no money for Ukraine for the next year in the defense budget, and I think that is something we will see in December. And there is no sufficient money in the budget, the defense budget. So if, as the Speaker of the Chamber of the Representatives, he probably will be the spokesman in the next year as well. Why we are not talking about the procurement of the U.S. weapon with the funds of the other countries? Japan helps us a lot, and I think that the South Korea is going to help us more. Yes, maybe they didn't have these weapons, so I think that Japan is not going to provide us weapons because of their historical background, but they can give the money. And what about the Norway? Norway is a country which sits on trillions of dollars, and Norwegians are really great. They have pension funds which are based on the oil extraction, but as far as I understand, they have more than $1 trillion. Some told me that $1.5 trillion. So for the defense, the Norway can allocate this money, and they can allocate even more if it is going to be a joint work for everyone. Can we buy some weapon from the U.S.? Will Donald Trump be against of it? No, he is not going to mind that, because he wants to support American business, and he wants to sell the best weapon. So there is a way out, and the European Union, Europe, which will have more obligations in this case, they can cover this gap. The main thing is that we have to show that the Russian Federation is slowly moving toward their fail. And these fail can take 1 year, 2 years, or even 10 years. We do not know the exact number, but the special services of these countries, so they know this information about the economy of the Russian Federation, which has exhausted all the funds, and the country which threatened the world with nuclear weapon. They cannot provide the butter for their country. They are buying Ukrainian butter, and that is hello from us to the Republic of Turkey and to the Arabian Emirates. We are delivering there, and they are buying from these countries Ukrainian butter. And I was working a lot about the Russian Federation, and everything can break up in one day. If the agreement between Tsar and his peasants will break down, if people will not get vodka and sausage, and I'm just saying you as it is, it's not Moscow and St. Petersburg. That is 100 kilometers from these territories. Don't give them bread, vodka and sausage, and you will have the protests, as it happened with Potemkin worship, when they found the worms in the meat. So Putin is afraid of this. Putin is afraid not of Donald Trump and the US at the moment. He is afraid of these protests, which he considers to be, he has cemented this power in the Russian Federation, and he has a police state which is enough to fight these protests. And what will happen later when these protests will not be, when these sanctions will continue? So the first thing you will hear is that they want the sanctions to be over. And here we have to remember that despite any new policies, despite any new approaches, but the documents don't burn. And in the international system, which the Russian Federation is trying to destroy, there are the countries which want to follow the rules. The US. If the US is ready to follow the rules which they set themselves, and they were the part of this international system, and they have the declaration, the Crimean Declaration, which was adopted in 2018, the official declaration, and we can call it Pompeo Declaration. Why? Because Pompeo is not in Trump's administration, and said that this position is not there because it doesn't matter. Pompeo doesn't matter in this case because it's Crimean Declaration, and where the U.S. states that the annexion of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea was illegal, and they are not going to recognize this annexion. So this document is valid. So the form of this, so it's not the international legal document, but that is a position of Donald Trump. And I would like to remind you, when did it happen? After he visited Finland, after he met the head of the Russian Federation, and Donald Trump was humiliated there. So what was he told when he returned to Washington, D.C.? He was told that you looked not really beneficial on the background of Putin, when it was said that Putin he crashed Donald Trump. So after that, quite fast, the Crimean Declaration was made, and by the way, it was presented in the presence of the Ukrainian diplomats, of the representative of UNDP. It was presented to Mustafa Dzhemilov, the head of the Crimean Majlis, as far as I remember, on the 25th of July 2018. And at that time, they made the decision on providing Ukraine with a lethal anti-tank weapons and the other weapons, but first of all, anti-tank weapons. So I'm showing you the example that the Russian position and their attempt to humiliate the leadership of the U.S., that is something we can also play with. It's not a secret, but anyway, it's going to work out now, because especially with Donald Trump, because the person who likes, from his point of view, fair deals, and for example, our discussion on the anti-tank weapons, that was an example of these kind of agreements and deals. So that was the two-side road. And the more we will have the arguments, and not just calls, because I think that there should be more official meetings, with delegations, tete-a-tete meetings, because phone calls are not that efficient, so they give some kind of results on the operational level, but it's not something very solid, because you never know who is tapping you. It's called not tapping, but it's kind of participation. It's called participation in discussion in the phone call. I do not mean Elon Musk, as far as I understood. He also had the chance to talk. But for example, the Turkish president, he was just listening, and I wonder whether Erdogan knew that Elon Musk had listened to him. So technologically, he can listen to many people. Well, I can say that there are lots of old news. Is something like déjà vu for me, because as far as I remember, Volodymyr Zelensky was very surprised. First, when the recording of his of his phone call with Donald Trump appeared later in the American structures and it was printed fully, so he was surprised. How come? So I can tell you that I'm not surprised anymore because I worked there and I know how it works, and there are no secrets in the US. And for example, if we're talking about financing of Trump and from where, so this information will appear, and it will appear not later than spring 2025. I mean, like, not these lobbies, but I mean the contribution, the donations. And unfortunately, you will see lots of scandal there, and later we will have. Well, I'm not talking about some certain country. I mean that, Iran, China. Well, actually, all of us went through 2016, and if Ukraine is very careful about all of these things, they're afraid not to have an impact on the US elections, not to interfere the elections. Well, at the same time, it's important to say it once again, because unfortunately commenting in Ukraine is not something strong. Officially, on the level of Congress and Senate, there is a special investigation committee which has identified the exact names and it was said that Russian Federation has interfered in the US elections. So it is something which is a proved fact. And for example, there is a quote: who is working, who is helping. For example, if you're friends, so if you will see, for example, if there will be the person who will try to add you in France, Kulibnik, that is a special service officer, and that is a person, I would like to remind you, he writes that we have to change the narratives which exist in the US, that there was the Russian interference, that it is Ukraine interference. That is the person who has spent a lot of time in Ukraine during Yanukovych's time, and he has said that I have sent the article into reliable media, Financial Times, Mr. Alyarchik, and also in Political, and they are fools. They bought that Ukraine interfered the US elections, and the articles appeared, and then they had in 2017 this kind of spin-off. So please read the basic documents. Electoral Commission, which is now continues observing the elections and the possible interference from the outset, and the fair calculation of the votes. In 2021, they made the official decision that there was no interference from Ukraine in 2016, 2020. But at that time, how many people were saying in Ukraine that Ukraine has an impact on the US, on the US election, and we're repeating the Russian narrative. So I'm very glad that this time Ukrainians are well taught, and the people are not supporting the Russian narratives on this matter. But at the same time, and by the way, there is no narrative that everyone supports one candidate. It's not working anymore. No one can blame Ukrainian commentators, journalists, politicians, say that we are supporting one politician and against the other one. So it's not working anymore. So it will be hard for the Russians to use their PSYO this time, but nevertheless, we have to be ready for the situation when you rely on your partner, the US, and Donald Trump as the closest and the best partner, and your future depends on them. And for Ukraine, it's true. And in this case, you have to be very close to them and not somewhere outside of these circles. So you have to be as close as possible and not as far as possible. So what should we do when Donald Trump will become the president? Everyone will say we have to work, find the approach. No, we have to work with Democrats as well. In 2 years, Democrats can return. So what should we do? We have to forget everything what we had in the future? No, on the contrary, we have to make the grounds for the future, for the Congress in the future. Maybe we will not see very strong support at the moment, unfortunately, but it doesn't depend on the friendship with the the people in the Congress. In fact, I'm very glad that Ukrainian focus, they are going to continue this work. But, for example, the statement of Mr. Johnson's of no further financing of Ukraine, or the ambassador of Ukraine has to leave the country. So that is something very strong, and I guess that's not going to be easy for Ukraine. And what is even more difficult is that I'm looking. So not to forget about this thing. We should have started with it, but we are finishing with it. So the worst scenario for the US and actually for Ukraine, it did not happen. That is the scenario of turbulence, of political chaos, and many Americans were afraid of it. And Joseph Biden, let me remind you, he has undertaken the responsibility for the provision of the democratic process during the elections and the safe voting. So he had fulfilled his promise and was very successful. We do not know what was happening behind this stage, behind the curtains. And the statement about 20 governors and Ukrainians sent to Washington, that was a very strong signal. It's not something that we should neglect. Maybe Democrats were preparing for the other signal, but in fact, Joseph Biden personally, and I would like to thank him and Americans, that everything was peaceful. And that is when lots of these elections, so we had like lots of states, 50 states were voting, and 435 congressmen and congresswomen, and 1/3 of senators. So that is a huge layer of the political system, and they have managed, and I think that the Russians are not satisfied with it because they wanted to undermine this process, and we hope the attention to Ukraine will be strong, and especially in Congress. And the most important thing is that I think that is a signal for us that you can forecast whatever you want, but the life is even more interesting than you can imagine, and it can make surprises. So there are some surprises which we expect, but nevertheless it shows that we have to work more with all political powers in the US, and in the US we have to work more with the producers of the weapons, because Donald Trump is not going to cancel the orders which were made for 2025, and I'm sure about that, and he is not going to go against his military lobby. So we have to work with business. We have to work through the system, through the topic, which is going to be external topic for Donald Trump, that is the freedom of religions. And every president of the U.S. selects the topic which is not related to security or domestic policy. And for the second time, the topic of religious freedom of religion expression is going to be elected, and that is a way to have contact with population. And we have talked about the scenario of turbulence and the implementation of the promises which he was making not only in the elections, but also it is stated in the program of the Republicans. It's not something which is worth nothing. So, for example, the question of the migrants, and the decisions are already made. For example, the Sudan. So on prohibiting registration of one of the marriage of the persons in marriage. So, for example, if you got illegally to the U.S. and then you married, then you can get the citizenship of the U.S. This way is prohibited this time. And also there are going to be some kind of suing about that, for example, in California, because that are the huge countries in the federative U.S. California is not going to, so the courts, there are going to be lots of court proceedings, and it was calculated that to implement all of these all of this line for deportation, they have to use the army, because and they are thinking what should be the red line for these, because it's also not very much legal. And of course there are huge money to support these people, and we are talking about millions of dollars in this case. So there are lots of the internal problems in the U.S. For example, the border, illegal crossing of border, drugs. So not to lose the attention to Ukraine, and also the bigger problems. Also, the Middle East, the People's Republic of China, and Ukraine has in this. We have three tasks. First is to keep the interest in Ukraine. First of all, countering the Russian Federation, which is undermining all the rules which U.S. established and the international laws. Second, we have to show how enhancing our transatlantic union and our partnership, how we can gain our results. Maybe not that fast, but we can have interim good results. And the third is that we have to understand that the U.S., and it doesn't matter who is leading this country, the three key words. I'm saying that not as an ambassador who used to work in the U.S. and also as a Ukrainian who worked in bilateral programs. For them, they have three key words. First, the national interest of the U.S. and also whether Ukrainian national interest meets the national interest of the U.S., so the strategic partnership and strategic interest. The second is, I would say, practical interest, pragmatic interest. I mean, that, for example, if we're talking about a trade agreement or a deal, it has to be mutually beneficial. But first of all, it has to be beneficial for the U.S. Without this component, you will not be able to move forward. And the third is that we are talking about different relations, but without trust. And the proof that we are reliable partner, that is something that make the cooperation concrete, and that is how the agreements and cooperation is made. So we have all the opportunities in our hands. I was not talking about our key three interests. The key interest for us is first the understanding of the specifics. And that is the first thing, the interest of Ukraine, the national interest of Ukraine. And I'm not talking about Zelensky's, Shmyhal's interest, or Stefanchuk's, or Poroshenko's interest, or the oppositional politicians, or even some separate businesses. I'm not talking about some names, and not even the upcoming elections, as Mr. Kornienko recently said, who works in the parliamentary system of Ukraine. He said, I hope that the U.S. will help us to be re-elected. And I was actually clarifying that because it was on the event we were organizing, because we were at the co-organizer of the marathon, and it is not in the press release because I thought that he made a mistake, but he has posted it himself because he thinks that it's the right position, that the U.S. and Donald Trump have to help the current government of Ukraine to be re-elected, and I didn't think that it's the correct understanding of the American approach and how they function. So they are going to work with any president, with any government, only if this cooperation is going to express the interest of the Ukrainians. So they are not going to interfere in our election. That is a new period. No one is going to interfere. No one is going to help one of the parties. It's going to work in the other way, and that is something we have to take in account. And then coordination of Ukrainian opposition in the conditions of lack of resources in Ukraine. That is a key thing at the moment. So the efforts of Volodymyr Zelensky have to be united with the efforts in Verkhovna Rada, Parliament, with Mr., for example, Kornienko and Stefanchuk, and maybe the group of people which is not actually the position. What kind of a position we can have? We have European solidarity, which has international experience, previous international experience, and now they are working. So why? So maybe finally we have to do that. If you do not want to have the government of the national, so to say, union, well, I'm not talking about union. I would like to say the government of the national survival. So if you do not want to do this in this way, use the American model as Polish did when Andrzej Duda and Donald Tusk met, and they said on the American direction we are going to work in one vote. And I think that Volodymyr Zelensky is quite an experienced president at the moment, and he's able to evaluate the risks, and he is able to work in this area in one voice, and not in the way how I hear it now. So we know how to lobby our interests during Trump's administration. So the first time you arrived on the 10th of July in 2019, the impeachment procedure started, and Ukraine became toxic. So I do not want to mention what has happened. I think they remember what has happened, because for me it was obvious that you should not behave in this way. And actually that is the reason why these top that was the reason why I quit from the diplomatic service, because you should not do it in this way. If there is going the repetition of the same actions due to the fact that we have informal diplomacy, or we know how to work with the new methods in the US, and I think that is going to be failure again. The failure we had in 2019. In the first month, it was very difficult to organize even the meeting with Donald Trump. And now, luckily, this meeting was not cancelled in New York, and in the very last minute we were able to organize it. So, in fact, we have lots of challenges, and our government should not cover themselves with the good relations. Yes, we have good relations. We have not even good relations. I think that Volodymyr Zelensky understands better now some certain tricks of Donald Trump, and charismatic, and they are on the same wave in this case, but it is not enough. A few more questions, maybe. Yeah, okay. So maybe a few questions from our colleagues, please. Greetings, Petro Kononov, expert on the NATO membership, military diplomat, and the colonel of the Ukrainian army. As Mr. Valeriy said, the era of Obama is over, and Obama, as you remember, he got the Peace Award for Crimea. Let's imagine whether it is possible for the two efforts, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, whose name is translated as knowledge collector for the aim of peace. If all these things will make Putin make the gesture of goodwill, and to go away from Ukraine and from the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and to announce that he got the demilitarized zone, and the border of it is 100 kilometers, the border line of Ukraine, and 100 kilometers both in Ukrainian side and in the Russian Federation. Whether these two presidents will get the peace prize for returning the territories of Ukraine. And the name of this project is Peace Plan Trumpsy. First of all, I do not think that with all the respect, we can see that Obama got this prize for giving up Crimea. That is your statement, and I'm not completely agree with it. And as for the demilitarization zone, DMZ, and, well, in fact, there is no Trump's plan in place. So the journalist asking, how do you like Trump's plan? So I have the question. What kind of plan? Because there is no plan, in fact. So one of the participants the advisor of the headquarters said that the president of Ukraine, if he is mentioning Crimea, he made it very rude and politely. So he says there is no Crimea anymore, even though we do not like to say it in this way, something like that. Well, let's check that once again, but this person has no official position and unlikely he is going to be in the administration, and everyone started to consider his position as Trump's position. So it's not even close. I told you about the Crimean Crimean Agreement 2018. This is the first thing, and the second thing, you mentioned just one of the elements of the plans and expert offers. It's something that is discussed for a few years. There are so many groups. I have calculated that these newly established groups, American Russian Ukrainian, American European, American Russian European Ukrainian groups, all of them, even at the moment, the representatives of and the members of the negotiation group during the negotiations of the Russian Federation, you know that we have the delegation, right? So according to we have the order of the president, the decree of the president, and we have the official delegation on the negotiations with the Russian Federation. And one of the representatives in Geneva, he is trying to say how good it will be to become neutral and get rid of the weapons. And he repeats it once again and again, and in many other places. So there are going to be lots of different things. So you said, to understand it with your mind, that there can be demilitarization zone, DMZ, but from the border, it is something that will take a lot of time, and it will take a very long time, meaning that why it will take a long time? Because when they will try to, in my opinion, so let's say they will suggest some border on the territory of Ukraine. So, for example, as the Russians want at the moment, so they want to get what they already occupied. So, as the head of the Russian Federation, say in Valdai, where foreigners actually are present sometimes, they said, and what about Ukrainian? What is Ukrainian there? And he said, well, we will protect everything we have, any territory of Ukraine. So we will occupy everything we will be able to occupy. So let's take the line on the front line, and let's consider we made some kind of DMZ there. I had experience in similar situations, and I can tell you that, first of all, it's, the Minsk agreements, that is one of the terms in the very beginning, and the Minsk agreements is something that is not really well perceived at the moment, and Zelensky is blaming Poroshenko, they are suing him, but at that time, those positions were supported by the majority of the Ukrainians. The delegation, which returned from Minsk and didn't allow the Russians to move further to Kyiv, which was absolutely realistic, they got applause from Ukrainians, from the parliament. But as you can see, there is time for everything. If there are opportunities to postpone the war, there might be the opportunities to postpone the war. And, for example, at the moment, we can enhance our positions, because this is a war which is, we don't want to have the long war. At that time, they wanted to unweapon us. So I mean, the mortar launcher is 5 kilometers, the Uragan systems 40 kilometers. So first of all, we had similar weapons, both from Ukraine and the Russian Federation, and approximately the same range. For example, the long-range systems we could not keep in this area, and now lots of weapons is available in Ukraine, luckily, but the main thing, where do the strategic bombers aim their missiles at? So, okay, you put some kind of lines, and the Russians will be just launching their bombers every time, and they are going to terrorize you. And all the time, you're going to be worse than the missile stroke by the patrons. You cannot imagine what can happen in the hybrid peace. And I can tell you, I say that it's impossible to make some line on the current front lines. The border is something that can be really valid, but nobody is talking about the borders at the moment. What Putin wants, he moves to drill further in Ukraine, and as I say, they want to have this kind of zone, but at the same time, they want to be closer to Odessa, to Kharkiv. They want to shell from Grad system this city. They want to terrorize this city. They are terrorists. They find the terroristic approaches to continue this war. Even if the full-scale war can be paused somehow, you cannot freeze it, the war, but at the same time, you can reframe it. For example, anti-terroristic operation we had in Ukraine, we had this kind of format frame, and it is possible, in my opinion, if you get around 50 Atacoms, 400 Tauruses, and you show the Russians that they can not move forward, and mobilization of 200,000 people in Ukraine, that would have stopped the full-scale war in Ukraine, but it does not give you the sustainable war, because the aim of the aggressor did not change. And the main thing here is that you've mentioned one component, and how we are going to resolve all the rest of the problems described in the statute of the UN. Because when we return to the normal life that which we're discussing in this case, the Russian Federation has to be sanctioned. So all the militaries in captivity has to be released, and their assets have to be frozen. But at the moment, they have $400 billion. And what can we do with the International Criminal Court? And that is also the Criminal Code of International Court. So this gestalt will continue the wars in the world. And I think that the world so-called war will lead to big regional conflicts, if not in Ukraine, that on the Korean Peninsula, and that will open the Pandora's box, and you will see that is going to develop so far that you will not be even able to track all the events happening. So I think that it's not the way to resolve this problem, and if we are going to, if the peacemakers are going to think in the way how they do it now, then I think that it's more like implementation of the short-term interest or the Russian position. And at the same time, Ukraine does not have the resources for all of these things, to deoccupy the territories, to pull them back. So all of these ideas are quite weak. And my position is that Nobel Peace Prize for this kind of peace, which leads to wars, I think it's quite a weird position of the Nobel Committee. And to be honest, they do not hear the people, and they should think about it. The peace is made by strong ones. The peace is made by the strong position. And why in the internal law, Beccaria one day said that there is a punishment. The punishment leads to the order. For example, in the US, if someone is intruding your house, so you can use the weapons. And here they are opening your doors, and it is correct, and it is right. On the in the internal policy and in the international policy, some things can be differently interpreted. And some things which we consider to be the way to resolve the problem are actually the new problem. Well, it's a long answer, but I think that we're at the moment on the different page on this. So there was a colleague from you, as far as I understood. Yes, some of the colleagues had the questions. I'm very sorry. We have the questions from the other colleagues as well, and beside that, we are over the time. Thank you. I'm in the third year of studies on the international affairs, and today we had the discussion on that with Mr. Subotin, if you know Mr. Anatoly Subotin, and he hopes that in some way the Russian society will be able to overcome this reincarnation, to find something new for them, the conscious position about something, when the Anglo-Irish scenario is implemented. Well, in years, we will have to forgive them. And my personal position is that I do not agree with that. I do not think that the Russian Federation has any kind of precedence to think as one nation, and therefore, well, they do not have the nation, in my opinion. They cannot think as one single population. So I really liked your statement that we have to have strong diplomatic moves, and because the Russian Federation does not follow the international law which we are using. So the question I have is, how can we on the international stage can justify the usage of and whether we need it, and how, if needed, the usage of the same methods which were used against us? Because as far as I understand, there is beneficial and non-beneficial situation. For example, if we take about the people in captivity, we are dressing up their people, we're feeding them, and our militaries are returning. And if we use a pragmatic approach, so you mean like whether we can violate the international law? According to the international law, can we move it a bit? Well, Mr. Subotin, that is one who is heading Subotin, that is my lecturer. So why I remembered Mr. Smetanin? Because if he is going to produce 100 of ballistic missiles, of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. So I actually care about this person more. In this case, your question about balanced approach is more justified. So at the moment, we do not have the resources the Russian Federation has, and I mean in the war. And speaking absolutely asymmetric situation, because they have, unfortunately, even nowadays, they have even more weapons and they have nuclear weapons. But at the same time, there is an advantage that they have deep. They have red territories, and so the Europe is not providing for us as the deep Russia does. So according to the international humanitarian law, which is regulating the legal sphere, Geneva Convention and the protocols, these conference protocols are outdated. They were regulating the wars of the 20th century, of the first part of the 20th century. But it appeared to be that the war of the Russian Federation against Ukraine is quite similar, with trenches, with lots of wounds, with using chemical weapons, with prohibited phosphorus weapons, with the weapons which is highly traumatizing one. So these anti-personnel mines for the people to have no legs, no arms. So that is the same thing we had, unfortunately, during the First and the Second World Wars. And in this part, it is more or less regulated, but at the same time, the Russian Federation is not fulfilling the requirements. And if you want us to do the same, if you want us to use the chemical weapons, we are not going to do the same thing, because Ukraine cares about the obligations we undertook, and we know that this trust to Ukraine allows us to have the international support. At the same time, there are some other issues. For example, shelling of the military objects with the missiles. So in the Geneva Treaty, there is nothing about the strategic bombers of meant for the nuclear weapons, because Russians use HA-32 one-ton missile, the one which can be used against the war ships. And what are they striking? As far as I remember, the first time they struck Kremenchuk, the Armstor Kremenchuk trading center. So what kind of Geneva Treaty and equal rights are we talking about? So sometimes you have to consider not only the tax, and as you already mentioned, that we have to treat the militaries in captivity. By the way, it appeared the same when there was barbarian attitude, and they made some scheme to protect the lives of the people and their rights. And in this case, yes, indeed. So what can we do? They treat Russians in the prison the same way. So they are not violating just Geneva Treaty. Their country is authoritarian, and in fact it is dictatorship, police state, and they are very tough. And it's not only Russia which behaves in this way. We also have the other countries like that. But we have to sue them. We have to require returning these militaries from the captivity. But I noticed when the Russians are showing the picture, they are not making it a problem. When they are striking Artem plant in Kyiv, and they want to strike Artem plant, but they are striking Akhmadit, it's not a problem for them. They say, oh, we missed. And according to Geneva Treaty, it's not regulated at all. Because there are only general rules mentioned there. And what about Tripilska power plant? So how can we prove that they destroyed it on purpose with the missile attack, and at the same time they threatened the lives of the people in the hospitals? And they say that it's a military object because it can provide the energy to the military. So if we used the drone to strike the tank, the power plant which is providing oil for tanks, that is a precise object. And if they are trying to undermine the Ukrainian power plants, and they cannot do that, whether is it a military object? And the UN is not considering this fact, and therefore I think that we have to not just explain all of these cases, but we have to suggest the changes, the amends to the Geneva Treaty, because the aggressor should not have the benefits comparing to the victim. And that is something that we actually, that is a legislative gap. And actually I talked to the International Commission on the International Law, where we were discussing this question, that are the lecturers and experts, but on the level of the state, I think that we did not apply for the amends to the international humanitarian law. Thank you, Mr. Valeriy. Maybe we can wrap up due to time. The head, Valeriy Chaly, the head of chairman of the board of the Ukraine Crisis Media Center, Ambassador and Plenipotentiary of Ukraine. Thank you very much for these questions, and it's obvious that there are going to be further questions, and maybe with a cup of coffee, well, we had some coffee, and maybe we will suggest some coffee to our guests, but I think that we can return to this question after inauguration of the newly elected president of the U.S., and we can discuss about the perspectives with this new team, and when the team will be more obvious. So wrapping up, I can say that how can we read the new American policy? Read, I mean, like, how to understand this new policy. For example, when businessman participates in the phone call between president, it's not an old policy, and actually it's not something clear to the rest of the world. But the fact that there is a war and you have to end it, and this businessman, for example, has good contacts with the head of the Russian Federation, personal contacts. He has a trust of the newly elected president, Donald Trump. I mean, Elon Musk. He takes photos with Marwan, with the family of Donald Trump, and he is constantly there, and therefore he participates in the phone calls. And at the same time, Donald Trump doesn't want to raise the toxic topic of the direct contacts with the Russian Federation. Maybe he wants Elon Musk to be in charge of it before inauguration. So there is a transition period, and the new channels in non-standard channels communication appear. So what does it mean? One of the thoughts I have is that Elon Musk can try to become the mediator in these talks, and Volodymyr Zelensky also respects him and also in touch with him. And what about Elon Musk? Elon Musk has an interest both in Ukraine and in the Russian Federation, and 75 million which he invested in Donald Trump's campaign, and moreover he invested even more in the Republican country, and he has to get this money back. And why Donald Trump don't give the opportunity for Elon Musk to return in this way? And it can be pivotal Marsh. There are lots of power plants, and you remember that missile Soyuz, that is the best thing which was ever constructed except for his ones, and it was constructed in Ukraine. So I think that these kind of non-standard things, we will see them. And as for the President Zelensky, we will see dozens of people who come to Zelensky and say that they have direct contacts with Donald Trump because they are playing golf together, they are going to the same swimming pool, and of course it's not going to be true. But he will not believe it. Well, in 2016, he believed many of them. He believed many. I can even name you the names, but maybe not today. But let's not use this card. So Volodymyr Zelensky is not going to repeat the mistakes he did back in 2016. In 2015. I don't want him to get offense, but also he repeated them in 2018. So in 2015, that was lack of understanding of what is happening and where is it moving, and why do we want to avoid full-scale war. At the time, he was not a president. He did not understand that. But in 2019, he did the same thing. He tried to avoid the full-scale war, and it didn't work out. So now we are in the same boat. So I recommend the president to think once again on this and to do it in the other way. In one cycle, we will return to, so the first appointments will be very, very different, I would say. And I do not think that Elon Musk will agree to have bureaucratic position because it's a conflict of interest. He doesn't want to lose money, but they have some blue ribbon, the committee which is controlling some direction. Maybe he will be some advisor, but he is not going to agree and to have bureaucratic position, but he will have very big impact. And Donald Trump trusts those people who earned more money than he did, and that is the first thing. That is the first category of people. And the second thing is more famous than he is. So there is no one more famous than he is at the moment, but Elon Musk is very close to him in this race. But after the 20th of January, there will be the first appointments. But after that, we will see the new wave of appointments, which is going to be more, so to say, professional. And in the end, I will show you how it is easy to forecast the future and how hard it is to say what is going to happen in 1 month. In the end of the first convention in 4 years, the time will pass very fast, and Donald Trump will do three things. First of all, Ukraine will remain sovereign, integral. It is going to be there. I'm not going to dive into details, but it's going to be there. The second thing, Donald Trump will try to be re-elected, and if he will not gain success, he will promote someone from his family, maybe his son, someone from his family. just not to change the name Trump. Well, you see, his son is so he is 35 years old. So maybe he's not 35 years old. So he's going to promote, and it can be weird, but we can see these discussions around his family. But I think it's going to happen. So my focus is that Donald Trump is not going to give up on power. So it's going to remain in his hands or in the family, on the hands of his family. So the next topic, American democracy. So, and he would have the experience. He was losing the power, and he knows what does it mean to have 33 court proceedings. By the way, everything is going to be cancelled because democracy is an interesting thing. As soon as you become the president, lots of criminal proceedings are closed. So that is being legitimate in the end of the day. And also in the US, you can elect the president from the prison. So very interesting period ahead. And in 4 years, you can check this position. And what is going to happen in half a year? Even we do not know what is going to happen in half a year. Thank you very much, Mr. Valeriy.